Hi guys, and welcome to another one of my video blogs. And here you can see that I'm going to be working on 10 tactical marines for the Blood Angels. Now I've put them all on stands so it makes it easier for me to paint. So that was I was just showing you there basically. Here I'm actually going to be using the polyurethane primer from Vallejo, and I got the camera in as close as I possibly could using the macro setting to make sure that you can actually see a bit of the mist if you look closely going on, so you can see how I'm working with it. Now there's loads of different ways that you can work with the airbrush, high PSI, low PSI, and you just get used to what works best for yourself. Here I think I'm working at about 35 PSI I think. And rather than blasting all over the miniature, I'm just taking my time to pick the spots that needs a little bit more priming, and also making sure that I'm not spraying onto any wet paint there, because that's how you can really screw up the paint job on your miniature. It will leave like rippling effects in the paint as the pressure of the airs push the paint around on the surface of the miniature. So you definitely don't want to do that. You want to make sure the paint gets down and it dries before you put any more down. But it's simple to do, and it's very quick. Also, you'll notice again, not wearing gloves. Please don't follow what I'm doing in the videos. Put some gloves on. Here I've got some Vallejo Game Colour Black that I've heavily thinned with Vallejo thinner. I know people out there in this country are using Windoline, and I've got some myself, but because obviously I've got such a large size of Vallejo thinner, I'm going to get through that before I start using alternative methods. But by and large, from what people say, it's a really good cheap alternative to the expensive Vallejo thinner. Expensive, it's not that expensive, but £7 for 200ml of Vallejo thinner, or £1 for a comparatively same size bottle of Windoline. That's where the saving is, really. That's quite a saving. So in future I'll be able to give a review of that sort of side of things. So anyway, going off that, what I was basically doing there was making sure all the areas that I personally believe would be in shadow, I'm just laying down a thin dusting of black there, so behind the jetpack. Now what I'm doing on all the top spots of the armour, I'm placing white down. Again, Vallejo Game Colours white there, and it'll be an equivalent to your GW Skull white. Again, you really have to thin your colours down to the consistency of like milk. You want to see it dripping and running down the inside of your airbrush there. And yeah, so right at the bottom of the legs there, I'm just putting a bit of white down. This is to enable me to just use one colour in the stage of shading and highlighting, rather than using different reds and oranges and whatnot. So if I actually lay down a highlight colour, which is the white, and the black there, it'll enable me to just put down one colour for the overall look of the Blood Angel there. Here I'm using Vallejo Model Air Scarlet Red. I really love this colour. And it goes down super smooth, and it gives a really nice look to the miniature. And they've got 5 or 6 reds in the range, and then they're all nice, so it's a case of picking the colour that you think is going to look nicest for your army. Now what I would say is in the pre-shading stage of doing the miniatures with black, I possibly could have been a bit more aggressive with the shadow and made the panels pop a little bit more, but again, it's all preference. So as you can see, I mean, I had a few messages back from people saying about priming with a miniature, you're going to get subpar results, this, that and the other. It's not the case at all. More likely than not, especially if you're painting in this sort of way, you'll get a smoother finish to the paint than using a brush. in certain areas, like this power armor for example, using the airbrush, I can guarantee that all of that power armor is going to get a super smooth flat finish, with obviously no brush marks or strokes there at all. So like anything, it has its advantages and it has its disadvantages. You won't catch me spraying eye details in with the airbrush. No, you still need to use your brush for those sorts of things there. And again, I just wanted to get into focus, you know, pretty much how quickly you can lay down that the colour with the airbrush. Right, okay. Here I'm using gloss varnish. This is for two reasons. The first reason being that it's going to protect the miniature, and the colour that I've been placed down, the paint that I've placed down is going to be protective. But the second part, which is probably the most important part for what I want to do, is to actually do some pin washing. Now you possibly would have seen me do that on the Rhino, and it works exactly the same here. Now I use satin varnish on the Rhino, and because the panel lines are much bigger, I could get away with using the satin varnish, but using gloss varnish on these miniatures is much better idea. So if you've got gloss varnish, you want to use that more so than the satin. It will give you better results when you're doing the pin wash. Now here I'm using Vallejo inks, and they will flow better than the GW washes because of the property of the ink there. It's just the surface tension is much better. I'll probably not put that into words correctly, but yeah, I've put a little black in there, and the mix there is just distilled water with a little flow aid in there, but you could get away with not using that flow aid, definitely. And I'm just mixing it up to a consistency where it's like a very dark burgundy colour, almost like the colour of you know, spilt blood, a lot of spilt blood, which is very dark. And I'm just eyeballing it. There's no ratios. I know some people in the community are really clever out there, and they have like a book that they keep with mixing ratios and whatnot. But I'm not that organised, to be honest, so I just do it as I see it. And that might seem like quite a lot of ink, but what you've got to take into consideration, I'm painting 10 tactical marines all in succession, so I want to make sure that there's enough of the wash to go around, because I want obviously more to match. Now here you can see this, I wanted to make sure that it was very crucial that I actually got this in as close as I possibly could. I wanted you to see how this works. Now I'm just feathering the brush along the edges, and the ink wash that I've mixed it's just literally sucking to the edges, and it follows the lines, and the effort involved in doing that is very minimal to yourself that's actually applying the wash there. And anywhere you know that there should be a shadow or a darker area, like in the vents of those backpack there or jetpack, I'm just making sure it goes in there. You can also see that I've picked up one of my Duff brushes, and still with a split end brush, it's still sticking to where I want the wash to be, and that's literally the capillary action of the brush working in unison with the actual mini that's been gloss varnished. The ink only wants to go around the edges and in recesses. And don't worry about that gloss varnish, that's very hideous. We will sort that out later on in the video. But again, even around the crest of the helmet there, or I'm not sure the actual technical term for it, but you can see that the wash again is just following the line. And it's still, you know, time consuming. To actually do every single miniature like this, but as opposed to painting your whole miniature red, then slapping a whole wash of Badder Black or whatever over it, and then going back over the whole miniature again with another base colour, maybe 1 or 2 coats to get rid of the unevenness of the wash. I personally believe that this is probably the neatest and the quickest way to achieve shading in all recesses, and it really does make the mini pop. And here I'm actually letting the wash pool, and then I'm collecting it from the recesses because there's so many lines there. So you can see as I dragged it across the brush, the ink went off the top of the surface and it carried on following along into the recesses. And what you'll find as well later on when we get rid of that gloss varnish with a matte varnish, that the actual shading that we've applied to the miniature, it will pop a hell of a lot more. The colours will stand out a lot more. The gloss varnish actually takes away a lot of the effects that you're adding to it because of the high sheen. As soon as we get rid of that, you'll see that looks really nice, the wash that we're applying there. I even wash into the eye sockets. Now I know they're going to be painted, but that enables me a really good guide of how much and where I want to put the paint in the eye sockets there for the lenses. So shading in the eye sockets there also helps. And yeah, again, yeah, the beauty of actually working on 10 Marines was it gave me loads of opportunities to film different things, and let's just say I had a lot of footage, and editing wasn't that fun on this. Okay, alright, I've laid down the decals, and using Microsol and Microset, which is available from Microscale Industries, I believe. You'll probably be able to get it online more so than your hobby store, but if you're very lucky and have a really good hobby store, then yeah, pick it up if you can. So the decal's basically set, and I've left it for a few hours to make sure that it's adhered to the shoulder pauldron there. And now I'm just using my hobby knife and just picking away at it. I'm destroying the decal to break up the uniform look of that white drop. And white being probably the worst colour out there that you could possibly have a uniform look to it, it really will detract from the rest of the model because it's so bright, so white, and you just look at it straight away. So if that was just one neat white blood drop, it would look a bit cartoony and a bit tie-like. Okay, this is Vallejo matte varnish. Again, I've said this before, if you're able to buy the larger sizes, please do so. The amount of money you'll save is, you know, it's ridiculous. I think for that 60mm size, I paid less than £3. To put that into perspective, 13mm of GW paint is about, you know, £3. So there you go. That's what, 4 or 5 times the size of a GW one. So if you can get the larger sizes in the Vallejo range, it's definitely recommended. And I'm just spraying out the matte varnish here straight out the airbrush there. Now you do have to be careful with varnishes in your airbrush. Make sure you thoroughly clean your airbrush out afterwards. You don't want this stuff clogging up your airbrush. So I use airbrush cleaner as soon as I've used it. I don't let it settle in the cup or anything like that. I mean, it's probably precaution on my side of things, but yeah, varnish works in a very different way to paint, and it's not going to dry like paint in your cup. And basically I'm just dusting all around the miniature with the matte varnish to get rid of that horrible gloss sheen that you've seen. And you can do this with a paintbrush. All these techniques that you're seeing, pretty much you can actually do, apart from the way that I was shading, pre-shading with the colours at the start. But the actual pin wash technique, you can hand gloss varnish with a paintbrush. The Vallejo gloss varnish works just as well with a paintbrush, and so does the matte varnish. You don't need to airbrush it to get those results. So if you want to do some pin washing, you don't need the airbrush, you can use your brushes. Definitely. Right, here I'm using Vallejo Model Air Steel and I want to get like a bolt gunmetal look. Now I have bolt gunmetal in the GW range, and I also have a bolt gunmetal in the Vallejo Model Air range, and I don't like them. The GW one is just too thick, and if you try and water it down, it starts to give you that sort of glittery effect, because the pigmentation is quite low, but the medium's quite high, so when you try to thin it down, it breaks up really badly. And the Model Air gunmetal, I don't know whether it's just I got a poor one, but it's similar. It's better than the GW one, but it's still it's thicker than the other Model Air lines, and it doesn't take too well to thinning. So what I've tried to do here is use the steel and add a little black paint, game colour paint, or it might have even been model colour. It doesn't really matter, whichever black paint you have. And I've tried to get it to the consistency of bolt gunmetal. And now I don't know whether you can see in the palette there, but the way that this paints and the smoothness is just on another level. I do intend to get the silvers and those sorts of colours in the Vallejo alcohol based metallic range. I've got the gold, and that's amazing, so I would imagine that their silvers are good, but for the meantime, I think this is like a happy medium that I'm getting. And the other reasons why I like it is not only does it flow amazingly smooth, and it doesn't clog up or detract from detail, but you get one coat finishes with this paint, so you can place it down really thin and it'll cover over pretty much any colour. I'm going to cover straight over the red that I laid down before. What I've tried to do with this unit is use as many of tricks and cheats, if you like, to speed up the process. When you're painting 10 tactical marines in a go, you don't want to lay down a grey base for all your metal areas and then lay on top of that the metallic colour. So using this colour mix, you can see that's a nice flat colour, and it's not got rid of any of the detail, and I did that all in one coat straight over the red. Right, here I'm using good old Badab Black, you know, Wargamer's best friend, and it's watered down about 50-50 with water. Might be a bit more than that, to be honest. I think Badab Black has its uses straight out the pot, but more often than not I water it down to make the overall look a little more subtle. And I'm just picking areas wherever I've placed down the metallic colour that I mixed up earlier with the Badab Black. Going back into the sockets there, I want those to be a bit darker. Eye sockets, sorry. And you can see that I've really let it pull in the areas of the backpack vents there, but that's sometimes I do that. What I'll do, I'll place paint and I'll use the actual miniature as a palette. So I'll let the wash pull in an area, and I'll keep taking the ink out of that area and adding it to others, and eventually I'll got rid of the pool of wash there. So using the miniature as a makeshift palette. See if you can save time. I'll try and do it. Now I'm not painting these how I used to paint my ultramarines, or how I do paint miniatures from time to time, where I'll just get one miniature and I'll spend 4 or 5 hours meticulously going over every single bit of it, hard edge highlighting it. This was painted to a nice pleasing gaming standard as quickly as I possibly could. So at the end of the video you'll see the photos, and although they look good, they're not by far from perfect. Right, okay, here I'm using Vallejo Model Air Steel, and this is just neat straight out the bottle. And it's not dry brushing, it's more like an overbrush on the edges, and I'm making sure all the panel lines and edges of the armour really pop and shine, because after laying down that Badab Black wash that I placed down, it really dulls down the metal. So I'm just making sure that areas that I really want to stand out and shine, like extreme edges of all the gun there are gonna pop. And if you want willing to spend more time on your miniatures, the top panel of that gun looks really nice if you paint it in a different colour as opposed to the gunmetal colour that I went with there. But again, you know, this has been a speed paint jobby from myself, and I wanted to cut down on the time that I spent. Again, you'll see right on the edges of those vents, nice shiny highlight. Okay, right, and that's it. I mean, I cut some of the parts where I did the purity seals, unfortunately, but as you can see, on the power sword there, I've put a little bit of a colour bleed into his shoulder pauldron there to make it look like it's glowing onto him. I'm not sure if that looks alright. As you can see, very basic painting job on these, but I painted all 10 of these in about 15 hours including modelling, which is pretty good for me. The cool scenery you see in the background was courtesy of Mac, Marnius Augustus Calgar, and huge thanks for him for giving me those, and I think they look really good in the snapshots there in the scenery. Yeah, and I've saved the best picture for last. I was given a special piece of terrain, and I think it's probably the nicest terrain you'll ever see. You'll wait for it, guys. I'm sure you'll like this one. The Blood Angel bits are awesome, really are, that I was given from Conrad Kurz. Really did make the look of the models. There we go. How would you like playing on that? 3 up club cover save. Thanks for watching, guys.